So tonight I'm going to talk about digestion. So digestion is looked at a little bit different in Ayurveda. In Ayurveda, we look specifically at Agni, so digestive fire. And I'm going to talk about Agni. I'm going to talk about stages of digestion. I'm going to talk about better digestion with food, because a lot of internal healing can be done through food and medicine, and just kind of altering and changing our concept of what we feel about food and how we look at food. We take too much time looking at the good and the bad, and it's like sometimes even the good can be really poison for our body, and sometimes the bad isn't as bad as it seems. So it is kind of funny when you really look at it and break down the foods and what they actually are and mean. We're going to talk about the lymphatic system a little bit, and then we're going to talk about helpful hints, so what you can do on the way. So I will start with what Agni is. So Agni is digestive fire. It is what we use to be able to break down, assimilate, and eliminate. So it's the process of digestion, but it's not just digesting food. So often we think of digestion as, right, the physical part of it, digesting the food that we eat, but it's also digesting sensations that we take in. So all day long, we're taking in different sensations through our different senses. All of our senses are working all day long, and at night they're able to digest it. During the day we digest food, at night we digest our emotions and our feelings. And then we have all the experiences that we have. So we have to be able to digest stuff. So we want our digestive Agni to be good, physically, mentally, and emotionally, to be able to get through this world, because they all play a part in each other. All right, so then we go into the byproduct. So when our body is not digesting properly, we have a byproduct that's called ama. And ama is, just to put it bluntly, if you were to look at your tongue first thing in the morning, it's that junk that's on your tongue. Or if you notice any mucus coming out of your body when you have bowel movements or when you urinate in the morning, like that would be all considered ama. And when it's on your tongue, it means it's in your digestive system. And we look at the tongue as an indicator of where it's at, depending on how heavy the coat is on the tongue and what color it is, will tell us a lot of where it is located in the body. So we use ama as a form of how to be able to work with our clients and to give them some sort of protocol to be able to heal certain parts of their body. So sometimes it's in our stomach, sometimes it's in our small intestine, sometimes it's in our colon. A lot of times it's in the colon. That seems to be a fairly common place, because it's the final place and holding ground. And since constipation and retaining is so prevalent in this country because of our holding and the season that we're coming out of, it does create a lot of toxics. If you think about what's held in our colon, that is the byproduct of everything that we've eaten. That's what our body wants to pull out and get rid of. It's our toxins that are coming out of our body. And if it's retained in our body for any period of time, that's where it can cause a lot of issues in the rest of our body, because our body starts absorbing those toxins, and we wonder why we don't feel that well. It's because we've got toxins just sitting there hanging out. So we want to be able to get those out. So I'll talk about the stages of digestion. So the stages of digestion, I want to use this analogy. So one of my teachers uses this analogy too, but I'm going to use the analogy of a rice cooker. So I'm going to use the rice cooker as an example of what digestion is, because it really does kind of break down, and we can all kind of imagine what a rice cooker can do. So the rice cooker would represent the heat. Okay, so we've got the heat of the rice cooker. Is the beginning of our digestion. So we want to be able to prep our digestion like we would a rice cooker. So when we're making rice in a rice cooker, we put the rice in there, which would be considered earth or kapha, and then water, which would be considered earth and kapha. And then we put it on the cooker, right? We want to rinse it out first. So we want to put clean food into our body to be able to process that food also. But some of the foods that we eat are maybe a little harder to digest. So the wheats, the glutens, the dairies, they're a little bit harder to digest, but they're good for our bodies to be able to digest. Meat is a little harder to digest, but it's also good for our body to break down different things. That doesn't mean if you're a vegetarian, they have to eat meat. I'm not saying that. We use meat as medicine in Ayurveda. It's a little bit different than how most cultures look at meat. So that's a whole nother topic. But anyway, so we want to look at the beginning of eating before we even eat. So about a half an hour before we eat, we want to drink about a glass of water. And what this does is it hydrates the skin of our stomach. So I'm going to make this really easy to understand, just because there's a lot of terminology that can go into this. It's going to go much deeper in my program that I'm designing. So we drink some water to be able to hydrate our stomach. And we want to make sure that this happens about 30 minutes before we eat food. So we're talking about a good glass of room temperature or warmer water. Teas will work as long as they don't have caffeine in them. And what this does is it creates a barrier so that when our body adds the stomach acids and juices, that doesn't affect our stomach lining. So this is the short, fuzzy version. So that's the beginning. So that's before we even start cooking the food. Then we eat the food, and we want to make sure we're eating food that is relatively easy to digest, all the way to things that are harder depending upon your constitution and depending upon the time of day. And I'll go through that a little bit later. We want to put that food into our body. So this is when our body starts to add some of the gastric juices. So we're eating our food. Our body's digestive system starts in our tongue. So our tongue IDs what we're putting in there and what gases or what juices it needs to be able to produce and get from our gallbladder and get from our liver to be able to digest that food. By the time it gets to our stomach, hopefully the right amount is in there if everything's working properly. And we want to make sure that everything's working properly because it affects everything later on. So we eat our food, and then it has to sit in there for about, give or take, about an hour. And this is when the juices are mixing in. This is when it's just starting to boil and we start to go to a simmer point. So the simmer point is when we're hitting the kapha part of digestion. And the kapha part of digestion is about 1 to 3 hours. So this is when our body starts putting it into our small intestine, when our body starts to extract it, but we really need to not eat at this time. So in Ayurveda, timing is really important. Not just what you eat, but the timing of eating is very, very important. And I'll talk about that just a little bit. So we have the food and it's being broke down. It's just like the rice. The rice is being cooked and it goes from this really hard, dense food to this really soft, beautiful, fluffy rice, right? So after that, then our body starts to eliminate it through our colon. And this is when air enters through our stomach and our small intestine. And this means that our body's ready to take in food again, because by the time it gets to our colon, it's on elimination, it's on its way out. It doesn't mean it happens then. It just means it's on its way out and it's no longer being processed. So it's just like rice. In the beginning, we have the rice, and we have a nice clean rice. We add water to it. We let it cook and then it simmers for a while. So that takes about 4 hours, give or take. So we want to make sure we have about 4 hours between our meals. If we eat our meals too close together or if we snack, imagine if you were to take that rice and you added more rice as it's about halfway through. So rice takes about 20 minutes to cook in a rice cooker. If you added more raw rice, the hard seeds into there, would it all be cooked the same time and would it cook properly? No. Our bodies are the same way. When we start snacking and eating food between our meals, this is when we cause digestive distress. And this is when our body starts to get confused, especially if there's really hard to digest foods. I mean, if you're eating baby food the whole time, maybe it's not that serious. Probably not, because it's going to break down pretty fast. It doesn't need much of the digestive juices to be able to do that. But then our body doesn't get the fiber to be able to eliminate properly either. So we want to make sure that we're using our body as a tool to be able to digest, to be able to get most of the nutrients out. If we're adding food in consistently, so if we're a 5 to 6 meal eater per day, that is going to create some digestive issues. And you might not notice it at first. You might say, oh, I just have so much more energy. It's like, well, maybe you should be eating more food in the middle of the day when your body is at its highest peak in digestion. So when we add food to it, what our body does then is it has some digested food and some undigested food. And what happens is our body tries to break it down. So our body digests the food, pulls it out, and then puts that food into our blood system, right? If it can be broke down that fine. So it has to be broke down pretty fine to get into our blood, to be able to circulate throughout our body and to feed the rest of our body. If it doesn't get broke down, what happens is it gets pushed into our lymphatic system. Our lymphatic system is the drains of our body. When our lymphatic system gets clogged or when it gets bogged down, then it creates a lot of issues in our body. So usually the proteins and the fats are harder to digest and they get stuck in our lymphatic system. Our lymphatic system isn't only the drains of our body, it's also our immune system. And that system circulates throughout our entire body. And it is actually the largest circulatory system in our body. The lymphatic system, specifically around our digestive system, has just been noticed as considered another organ of our body. So in the last couple of years, it is now considered an organ. So the 79th organ of our body. So the lymphatic system around our digestive system is key to be able to extract things that we can't digest, and to also create the proper immune response when we get sick or when something doesn't seem quite right in our body. The lymphatic system is absolutely fascinating, and it's the most complex and the system we know the least about. In Ayurveda, it's a system we start with when we work on things. So we start with the lymphatic system and the digestive system together because they're so closely linked. And then we look at other systems, because if they're not working properly, nothing else is going to work properly along the way. So once we get done digesting the food and it gets to our colon, then we're able to eat again. And this is about 4 hours. So going into what I talk about in a lot of my lectures is about timing. And I talk a lot about the importance of meal timing. And I see my ring light is making a crazy circle there, and I apologize for that. I'm still working on how the lighting's going to work in here. This is a new space for me. So we have this wheel right here. We have noon at the top, midnight at the bottom, and then 2, 6, 10, 2, 10, 6, and 10. So PM, AM. And we look at this as the rules to Ayurveda, and the breakdown of it just means the different constitutions. And I won't sling a whole bunch of the Ayurvedic lingo, because that's what you learn in my programs, and we'll talk about later a little bit. But we want to eat our largest meal in the middle of the day. Our digestive fire is the hottest. So think of the sun outside. If we follow nature's laws, which is what Ayurveda does, so we follow the laws of nature, at noon, our digestive fire is the highest. The sun's also the highest. It's the hottest time of the day. So this is when we want to eat the largest meal of the day, and maybe even the most complex. So this is when we'd eat our meat. This is when we'd eat things that are harder to digest, like wheat and gluten and dairy, versus eating them in the morning. Might be okay if you have really strong digestion, if you're more of a pitta constitution, so you have that fire and that heat in your body to be able to digest food. Fast metabolism, usually those people are more pitta types, so they can eat a little bit heavier meal in the morning. But most people don't, either aren't hungry in the morning because they have a lot of stagnant food in their body because they eat too late, or they're more kapha constitutions, so they're going to have more mucus and more stagnation in their body naturally. But a small meal in the morning before 9 o'clock is really ideal. And then you have plenty of time to digest it before noon, and eat that large meal at noon, and then your last meal about 6 o'clock p.m. Not much later than that. Latest is at 7, but then you're really pushing it, especially if you have a heavier constitution. So if you're a thicker body, if you've had problems losing weight most of your life, if you accumulated fat in your midsection, you do not want to be eating any later than 6 o'clock. And in fact, many of you, I would recommend even fasting at night. And then you go into the Western terminology, intermittent fasting, which is a huge fun thing to talk about also, where you would fast all the way through here. Westerners tend to eat their last meal at night and then fast the morning. We do not want to miss breakfast. Breakfast is break the fast. We want to break that fast with something to kindle the digestive fire so that we can digest at noon more intense foods that are a little harder to digest. We don't want to be creating this huge meal here or skipping that meal even, and then eating a huge meal at night. So the huge meal at night happened. This was not the way it always was. We usually ate our larger meal in the middle of the day because families would get together and eat a noon meal together. It happened after the Industrial Revolution, when a lot of people went to work and then took a sack lunch to work and then ate the biggest meal at night as a family. And it's really changed our culture's perception of food, and also created a lot of digestive issues along with it. It's not that all wheat and dairy and gluten has changed that much. It's that our body's ability to be able to process and digest it has changed, because we can get anything, any time of the year, anything that we want by just going to the grocery store and getting it. And in Ayurveda, we also look at the time of year. So we're not just looking at the time of day, but the time of year. So the time of year plays a huge part in what our food would be. So naturally the food this time of year, I mean, we're starting to move into the spring. So the spring foods would be very different. It'd be things that are sprouting out of the ground. So sprouts and greens would start to be our food, along with roots that would have some bitters and astringents and pungent taste to them, along with a lot of spices. So this would be the time of the year when our bodies would technically fast, versus in the winter, we're eating heavy, harder to digest foods, stuff that we'd canned and kept. So those of us that are a little bit on the older end or come from farming communities, we had carrots and potatoes and onions in our basement forever. And it was like, by the time you came to this time of the year, there wasn't a lot of food left. It was all sprouting, right? You know, there was potatoes growing up to your ceiling and all that kind of stuff if you didn't have them covered in the dark properly, but they were already starting to sprout. And then you plant those and grow the potatoes for the next year. So a farming community will get it a little bit more. Those of us that maybe have our own gardens, we get that too. But at the same time, it's like we've really detached from where our food comes from and realize that there are certain seasons in our foods. So in the summertime, it's plentiful, right? We have so many different foods that we can eat, even in the northern climates that we can eat. And though the more we can connect with nature in the seasons, the more it creates the right, what we call microbiome in our body, where our digestive bugs are balanced properly. And that comes from eating foods in the right way. So there's certain foods that should not be eaten seasonally. There's some that kind of fall seasonally, like garlic and onions can kind of be eaten seasonally, but there's other things that should not be. You should not be eating salads in the middle of winter. Your body does not process or digest them properly. Plus, they don't naturally come in nature that way. They're brought from other climates that can have that. And those of us that live in the northern climates, we should be eating more soups and stews. But what do we tend to get hungry for in the winter time, right? Soups and stews. And they're much easier to eat and digest. And on a farm family, we would eat our huge meal in the middle of the day. And at night, it would be what kind of was left over or made into a soup or stew, because it was much easier to digest. So this meal is called supper, and supper translates as something a little extra. So it's usually the smallest meal of the day and the easiest to digest. And in our culture, it's usually the largest meal of the day and the hardest to digest. And we usually eat it quite a bit later than we should. And if you do it once in a while, like that's not a big deal. When I go down and I get to hang out with my family, it's just whatever at that point. But when I eat on my own, I'll either fast at night, or I'll eat a smaller meal around 5:30, 6 o'clock. I don't push it much later than that, unless I'm out with somebody or doing something. So I really try to stick to it. And I have noticed a huge difference. And it's pretty amazing, especially if you're trying to manage your weight or manage your hormones. It does make a big difference in it. All right, the lymphatic system. I'm going to touch a little bit more on the lymphatic system. So the lymphatic system is the drains of our body. So if you think of your house and your body as your house, you've got the circulatory system, which would be the water in our system that moves around, okay? And it brings all the nutrients into our body, into our cells. Blood travels with nutrients, and it also travels with oxygen. So it feeds our body in many different ways. Then we have the drains of our system. So the drains of our house, the drains of our system is our lymphatic system. It's what pulls out the stuff we can't digest or we can't use. And we want these systems to work properly. Because if you think about it, if the drains in your house would start to clog up, what would happen? It would get bad really quick. Your toilet starts to back up. Like, seriously, that's an issue. But when we think about our lymphatic system and we're having bloating and gas and stuff like that, we just think, oh, that's just a normal thing that happens every day. That's not normal. Huge red flag. That's like the toilet in your house is starting to back up. You would just sit there and go, well, it just happens every day. You know? No, you wouldn't. You'd be like, shit just got real. And you do something about it. So you want to take your lymphatic system that serious, because if you just run your faucet and your drains are plugged, it's just going to keep on coming back, not going to be processed. You're going to start seeing inflammation in your body, because your body's response to illness and to disease is inflammation. Inflammation isn't always a bad thing. When you get a cut or a bruise, inflammation creates that heat, and the circulation and the blood and the lymphatic system attacks it with the proper bugs, we'll just call it, just to keep it simple. And, it has to happen. When we get an illness, we want that inflammation to happen, not overreact. We want it to act properly so that our body can fight off illness. All right. If our lymphatic system is clogged up, those things don't work so well. And that leads into hormones and all that kind of stuff. This is why we look at the lymphatic system as the system to be able to check in with. You can still stuff whatever you want to through your pie hole, but if you can't digest it, it's going to cause a lot of issues. So there are things you can do. Part of it, get on the clock. So as you can see, I've got little words on here. This is something new that I just made up today, but it has to do with the different systems and what happens to it. So in the middle of the day, we want to digest our food. In the middle of the afternoon, we want to use our creative brain. This is the Vata time of day. This is when our mind is the most creative. We want to take in the senses. So in the afternoon, good time to go for a walk and take in some nature because you'll absorb it so much faster. At night, you want to unwind and be able to rest. This is the time to spend time with your family. Eat a little earlier, spend time with your family, go for a walk, move your body, but start to wind down. Get off the screens as much as possible, especially about an hour before bed. It does stimulate, it does block melatonin production. And there's plenty of really valid research around this. So going into the evening, we want to make sure that we're going to bed around 10 p.m. or earlier. 10:30 is the cutoff point, the latest, and you're not watching TV till 10:30. You can record all that stuff. Those of you that have TVs, record it, watch it earlier when your body can start producing melatonin for the evening. If you start amping your body up again, sleep is not going to come, or it's not going to be very deep and you're going to wake up tired in the morning. This is the time of night when we detoxify. It is the only time our body detoxifies at a cellular level. It's the time our brain detoxifies. So at night, our synovial fluid comes up through our brain stem, goes into our brain and pulls out the toxins. It pulls out 3 pounds of toxins a year. And with our environmental toxins the way they are right now, you don't want to miss an opportunity to flush out your brain. Just saying, there might be a link between dementia and Alzheimer's and sleep. I don't know. No, there's actually plenty of research around that. But we want to make sure we're getting enough sleep, because that sleep, our brain shrinks just a tiny bit and it flushes everything out at night. It's also the time when we digest our memories, our process our stuff from the day. So the senses we take in, and it also processes our stress. So that's why some of us have really crazy dreams. We're actually processing our stress from the day. And we do this without a lot of attachment to emotion in most cases. And if you don't remember your dreams, that's fine. Like that's every constitution's a little different on what they remember for dreams. Believe me, if your melatonin levels are a little high, you'll have very crazy vivid dreams. It's pretty awesome. I love melatonin. That's a whole nother topic though. And then this is the time we want to rest, and our body starts to move things out. So our colon starts to become active, hopefully. Peristalsis starts to exist. So muscles of our colon start to move, hopefully. And then we want to have our bowel movement about an hour, no later than an hour before we get up, or after we get up in the morning. And we want to be getting up in the morning around 6. So some of my teachers and I have discussions about this. And those of us that live in the northern climates are like, seriously, like 6:30 is fine. And in the middle of winter, because we're fighting a whole nother thing that the Southerners aren't fighting as far as the cold goes. And our body needs that a little bit more rest or hibernation. Us Northerners are definitely a little more hibernators than what the Southerners are going to be. It's just different. So we want to make sure that we're getting enough sleep. And then in the summertime, even I'll get up at like 5:30 versus in the wintertime, I sleep until 6:30, because I know that my body's immune system is working so much harder to be able to fight things off, and I don't get sick. So if I get sick, I know exactly what to do. Go to bed earlier, sleep a little bit later, get in that 9 hours versus normally I'm a 7 to 8 hours. No less than 7 hours of sleep. Once you start hitting less than 7 hours of sleep, you have compromised your immune system. You have compromised your reproductive system. You've compromised your lymphatic system. You've compromised your cognitive function. So you've pretty much given up any power that you have during the day. Those of you that say you can sleep like 5 hours, I'm like, just imagine if you got sleep, you would be like brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And I noticed the difference. If I go to bed at 10:30, which 10:30 is definitely my time. But if I get up earlier, I do wind that back a little bit. But if I get a nice 8 hours of sleep, I am like top of my game. If I'm getting that 6.5, I am not the same person. And then we start relying on other things. This is where the digestive process comes in too, because we start to crave other things. We will crave more sugar during the day. We'll be more snacky. We'll need more stimulants. And that might be chocolate, and that might be some sort of sugar, and it might be caffeine or coffee. This is where the issues really come, because the weight gain isn't always the real foods you're eating at breakfast, noon, and in the evening. A lot of times it's the other junk you're stuffing in your face. You don't even realize you're doing it. That's the worst part of it. You'll go into the kitchen, you'll grab something, you'll eat it, and it's just subconscious. So how conscious are you of what you're eating? And that's another thing that we look at in Ayurveda, is what atmosphere do you create when you eat? So thankfully, I was fortunate to be able to grow up on a farm and eat with my family. We ate as a family, I think, just about every meal, unless I had a game. Then, we would go out and eat before. I'd have to eat before so that I could play. But a lot of times we sat and ate every meal together. So I grew up that way. And then I got away from it for a while, and then I got back into it, which is what most kids do in life with their life, right? They shift back and forth a little bit. But now it's so ingrained with me that people know that when we eat at Kamie's house, or if I have a friend over, they'll be like sitting at the table and be like, I'm ready to eat and respect the food. So that's kind of the thing that I do, is like, if you're eating at my house, you're respecting the food, because this food didn't just magically show up here cooked. All right. Even when you go out to eat, especially those of us that haven't went out much during COVID, it's like a gift to have somebody cook for you at this point. So, really honor the process of the food, and gain a respect and a relationship with food again. Taste your food, sit and eat. After you get done, take a deep breath, take a moment to say, okay, like that was food, like I'm good to go. And then get up and move. If you get up and move right away, think of that cooking process of the rice cooker. If you get up and move right away, what your body goes into is a degree of fight or flight, depending upon your stress level at the time. So if you're gobbling down your food and then going back to work, you are going to create digestive distress, and you wonder why your belly hurts, or that you have gas and bloating when you're sitting at your desk doing work, because you didn't take that time to honor your food. And we take food for granted. We really do in this country. And it's unfortunate, because I think if more of us grew our own food, which I'm going to have classes on, because I absolutely love growing food, and I have my chickens and they're just like so entertaining. That's my entertainment for the day. When I'm sitting there eating, I watch my chickens make a mess of my yard, because it's very entertaining. But realizing where our food comes from and having a connection. If you ever get a chance to go hang out at a farm and see some of these farms, these small farms around that you can get milk from, or you can get different things and eggs from, really experience it. I highly recommend it if you're not from a farm community. I know some of you are, that I see on the other pages, but really check it out, because the more connection you have with food, the more respect, and the more you realize that we don't need as much food as we take in. We take in about 200% more food than we actually need. And for those of us that have went through a detox and cleanse, especially one that's a significant amount of time, so mine is about a month long. By the time you get done with that month, you realize how little food you actually need to be able to survive. And too often we just eat food without even thinking about it. And again, we think about how much we spend on groceries, and it's about to go up significantly. You can't tell me that after all this stuff that the money doesn't have to come from somewhere. So we're gonna see a rise in food prices, and food needs to be a priority. So we can't be buying cheap food, but you can buy food that you make the food and you feel full after you're eating, if you take the time to eat your food, if you eat at the right times, and really honor where it comes from, and even maybe grow a little bit of spices or herbs and spices the first year. And that's usually where I start some of my clients, is like, okay, let's get a pot and grow some basic, herbs. Start with that. And then the next year they're like, oh, I want to have a garden. I'm like, okay, sounds great. So being able to really connect with your food is a big part of what Ayurveda is too. So anyway,